reason based upon some intelligent design. You see, he's begging the question, because if there is no God, then there is no being that creates some kind of reason. So if there is no God, he can't assume that there is a God just to try to prove it. If the universe has no omniscient, intelligent, all-knowing, all-good force that started it and continues to sustain it, if it is just a process that doesn't have a personal God behind it, then there is no reason for things to happen. Now, if I drop my pen, it'll hit the ground, and the reason for that is gravity, but that's not a conscious, purposeful design. So Dr. Craig can't say, well, we need a reason for everything to happen, so we're going to invent a God. Just like he wants to say, well, I have trouble locating the source of moral values without my biblical God, so I'm going to invent a biblical God to be the receptacle and to house those moral values. You can't have it both ways. Now, turning to the resurrection. The resurrection is so preposterous that Dr. Craig has been unable to overcome its initial dramatic improbability. Dr. Craig never really denied that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and he never refuted my discrediting of the supernatural whatsoever. He suggested that those who deny the resurrection, he's always said, presuppose that miracles are impossible, but that's not my position. They are logically possible, however they are extremely unlikely. There's no reason to say that Jesus' resurrection is more likely than the moon's being actually made of green cheese and the existence of Santa Claus. Now, the historical evidence for the resurrection fielded by Dr. Craig is quite weak. Regarding the empty tomb, even if Jesus' tomb were empty, that in itself would not show that a supernatural resurrection took place. There are good reasons in any event, though, to believe that the empty tomb is anything but a legend. Our earliest source in 1 Corinthians does not even mention or even imply an empty tomb. It was not until around 70 AD, when the Gospel of Mark was written, that we find any reference to an empty tomb. 40 years or so is plenty of time for a mythological legend to develop. Regarding the alleged appearance of the resurrected Jesus, our earliest source is again 1 Corinthians. Here the Greek word "ophthe" is translated as appear, but does not necessarily mean physically appear. It can describe either a physical appearance or a non-physical appearance, and there is very good reason to believe that Paul's experience of Jesus, as set forth in 1 Corinthians, did not involve a physical appearance. According to Acts 22:3-16, Paul did not see Jesus at all. All he saw was a bright light and heard a voice. Only in the Gospels written long after 1 Corinthians do we find any mention of the physical appearance of Jesus in a resurrected state. So, this, along with the difficulty of proving a supernatural miracle, renders it highly unlikely that Jesus was seen alive after his death. As you know, in Acts 26:8 it says, "Why is it thought incredible by any of you that God raises the dead?" Well, my answer to Acts is because no one alive has ever seen the dead raised. If we knew that 1 out of every 100 dead people would be resurrected, it would be a different story. But our empirical investigation of the world around us, our logic, our discernment doesn't show that. And so in a book enthusiastically endorsed on its back cover by Dr. Craig, Christian philosopher Stephen T. Davis says, "Clearly anyone who wants to argue in favor of belief in the resurrection of Jesus, as I am doing now, must make a powerful case." And Dr. Davis goes on to say, "It must be strong enough to overcome the bias that all rational people share against highly unusual and miraculous events." On the same page that this quote begins, Professor Davis also says, "I believe Christians need to recover a sense of the shocking absurdity of the very idea of resurrection." So Dr. Craig endorses, in fact, the writings of a fellow Christian who admits that the very idea of the resurrection is shockingly absurd. So certainly the Christian God is the most vicious sadist in the universe if he would punish us eternally just because we couldn't bring ourselves to believe something shockingly absurd. If our eternal damnation hangs in the balance, then God owes us more evidence. If we know enough to know that God has made revelation, then God owes us a further revelation to meet the honest intellectual inquiry of our minds. God has been too hidden to justify sending us non-believers and other believers to hell. Christianity cannot be true.
Thank you, Mr. Tabash. We'll now have a 10-minute rebuttal by Dr. Craig.
You know, I still haven't heard any good reason to think that humanism is true. We've heard attacks upon the Bible and against Christianity, but I've not heard yet any good reason to think atheism is true. Eddie had raised the problem of evil, but in the last speech I pointed out that philosophers agree there's no incompatibility between the two. And I also argued that evil actually proves the existence of God, and Eddie didn't respond to either of those rejoinders. Secondly, I said there's no good reason to think that human beings are the foundation of moral value. If God exists, he's the foundation. If God does not exist, then human beings are just animals, and animals don't have morality. If a lion kills a zebra, it doesn't murder it. If a pack of hyenas takes the zebra's carcass from the lion, they take it, but they don't steal it. They're not guilty of theft. And on an atheistic view, people are just animals. So this presents a real difficulty for the humanist. How do you justify his set of human values? This question is critical for us who live in the post-Holocaust age. Peter Haas, in his book Morality After Auschwitz, The Radical Challenge of the Nazi Ethic, asked the question, how could an entire society have willingly participated in a state-sponsored program of mass torture and genocide for over a decade without any serious opposition? Listen to his answer. He says, far from being contemptuous of ethics, the perpetrators acted in strict conformity with an ethic, which held that however difficult or unpleasant the task might have been, mass extermination of the Jews and Gypsies was entirely justified. The Holocaust was possible only because a new ethic was in place that did not define the arrest and deportation of Jews as wrong, and in fact defined it as ethically tolerable and even good. Haas goes on to point out that because of its internal coherence and consistency, the Nazi ethic could not be discredited from within. So how does the secular humanist propose to show the Nazis that they were wrong? You can't find moral values in a test tube. Without a transcendent anchor point for your moral values, you are lost in socio-cultural relativism. And there's simply no way to be able to consistently condemn the values of National Socialist Germany in favor of the values of the Western democracies. If God doesn't exist, I think we're basically left, as Nietzsche said, with nihilism, the destruction of all meaning and value in life. We're certainly not left with humanism. So we've not seen any good reason to become a humanist tonight. Now, are there good reasons to think that Christianity is true? Well, I first presented two arguments for the existence of God. First, the cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And he did not dispute, in fact, he affirmed the second premise that the universe began to exist. But he disputes the first premise that whatever begins to exist has a cause. He says this is only true of things in space and time, but not of the universe as a whole. I think that's a gratuitous exception that he wants to make. The principle of causality is not a natural physical law that would be different if physical parameters were different. It is a metaphysical principle that is true in all possible worlds, that something can't come out of nothing. Being cannot come from non-being. And honestly, folks, if the alternative to theism tonight is to believe that the whole universe just popped into being uncaused out of nothing, then I say let the atheist take that view, because nothing, I think, requires more faith than that. Now, Eddie also says causes have to exist prior to their effects, and there is no priority temporally to the Big Bang singularity. No, causes do not have to be prior to their effects. Causes can be simultaneous with their effects. For example, a heavy ball resting on a cushion being a cause of the depression in the cushion. They could exist forever like that, and you would have a simultaneity of cause and effect. So I think that he's utterly failed to refute the first argument that I gave. I think it makes it plausible that there is a creator of the universe. What about the contingency argument? Remember, it went like this. Everything has a reason for its existence. If the universe has a reason, then that reason is God. And thirdly, the universe is a thing. And from that it follows that the universe has God as its reason. And he says this is question-begging because there's no reason to think there is an intelligent designer. Well, I'm not arguing there's an intelligent designer. What I'm simply saying is that when we look around at the world and we think about things philosophically, we see that things have reasons why they exist. They're either contingent, in which case they are causes, or they're necessary in their existence, in which case they exist necessarily.